tonight, as you all seem to know, we're talking about mental health, common problems and things that, how things can go wrong. And then from an agenda perspective, I'm going to give a quick intro to the Free Thinker Institute and introduce myself since you all introduced yourselves. I'm going to talk about what I would call the unfair demonization of mental health issues, the actual prevalence of mental health issues, and then the good news is that a lot of people are trying to prevent the demonization of mental health issues. And I'll talk about the number of people that can't get help today and how we can get more people help. So why don't I go into, let me just move my screens around. So my name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor, now an entrepreneur, and my hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy. I'm also the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which is a 501c3, the one that brings you tonight's event and these events on every Tuesday evening. What's that? Daddy's in the middle of presenting, my love. Sorry, 7-year-old twin girls. I can't do it now, Laura. Later. So sorry. So super adorable kids. I forgot to say I'm a father of twin girls. As the FTI, we're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We want to help people be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. We also have weekly members-only events that a few people alluded to, where we apply practical wisdom into our daily lives and help each other in sort of a peer mentoring sort of group and with a new friend circle. We have only one rule in the FTI, and I'll ask everyone to follow it tonight, and that is to remain polite. You can really say anything you want as long as you can say it politely. And I recommend trying to keep objective about things and not getting emotional, because that's what keeps us in our critical thinking part of the brain, which is what we try to practice here at the FTI. And I recommend, if you hear someone that you disagree strongly with, the more you disagree with them, the more you have to learn from empathizing with them and doing what we call listening to understand, where you're trying to understand why in the world did they come to that conclusion that you can't possibly imagine someone coming to. They do have a reason, and it's always better, and you learn more from understanding why they came to that conclusion, whether it's me or someone else in the group. You'll learn more from asking thoughtful questions and listening, and there will be plenty of opportunity to do both. So that said, I'm going to start with, I have kind of, I'm going to start with the demonization of mental health issues. People with mental health issues are often portrayed in like film as dangerous and violent, whereas the reality is actually totally the opposite, actually. Only 3 to 5% of violent acts come from mentally ill people, which means that mentally ill people are actually far safer than people who are not mentally ill, which is pretty counterintuitive if you think about the way that the mentally ill are portrayed in movies and popular popular media. The other thing that's interesting is that crazy, insane, or psycho are typical terms that people use to describe people with mental health issues, and it creates this tribal us versus them. The mentally ill are the others, and we are the mentally healthy people. And ironically, I would say that there are probably people who, are hiding mental health issues because they don't feel comfortable coming out with them because of the demonization of mental health issues, that are even saying some of these things to go along with the crowd. And so it creates this kind of bullying mentality of people with mental health issues, pretending that it's a small minority. And we're going to discuss how it is not a small minority of people that have mental health issues, which as we'll recall, even if you were to, even if they were a small minority, it would not be a dangerous minority. So, or at least certainly they're less dangerous than the average person that doesn't have mental health issues. So and next is that people with mental health issues are often blamed for their issues. Now, a few people here are physicalists and would say these people, and I won't go down that tangent, but I'll just say that, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around people blaming people for having mental health issues. There actually is not a lot of research on whether or not mental health issues are preventable. It's not a well-studied thing. So even though it's not fully explored, there's certainly no evidence to say that mental health issues are significantly preventable. And so there's really no good justification by which you could blame people for having them. And my hunch is that there are certain things that might be minimizable, or at least where you can minimize your risk. But I would be willing to venture that to guess that there are a lot of mental health issues that are not avoidable from, behavioral actions. So that said, the other thing is that a lot of mental health issues, most are treatable with different types of medication and counseling. And those are the two primary ways that I know of to treat mental health issues, and that I learned about through research. And often both of those are looked at as a bad thing by a lot of people in society. Oh, you're seeing a counselor, maybe something's wrong with you. Oh, you're taking medication, then something's wrong with you. Whereas really the medication and counseling are there to treat the mental health issues. And so we should look at someone taking medications and getting counseling as making themselves more healthy, and an appropriate way to respond to the situation of having a mental illness or mental health challenges. So we're going to talk about later that when it's treated this way, it can actually lead people with mental health issues to have worse mental health issues because it creates social isolation, since people are sometimes demonized for treating their mental health issues, which is, a whole nother level of misunderstanding, is my polite way of putting it. And uh, that stigmatization leads some people to not seeking help that actually need it. And it also leads some untreated people with mental illness to be treated as criminals and put in jail, because police officers are often not trained with how to deal with mentally ill people, which sometimes leads to an escalation and incarceration of mentally ill people. And we have a criminal system that is not the best at dealing with mental health issues either. So some religions and cultures look at mental health as a punishment from a higher power, and that contributes to some of the above, but is not the exclusive contribution. And then, like a lot of topics that the FTI covers, there's really not general education about mental health issues in academia or industry. And so it becomes kind of this taboo subject that people just often don't know much about, unless they have mental health issues themselves and take the initiative to research it, with which not all those that have them do. So let's talk about the prevalence of mental health issues. 50%, and this number really did surprise me when I learned about it. I learned about it a while ago, and I've mentioned it in other events, but 50% of people will experience a mental health illness at some point in their lifetime. And that's a Harvard reference. By the way, I'll share the presentation along with links to, source where I get my quotes from or my statistics from. So next is that 5.5% of US have serious mental illness, and it goes into the definitions. I'm not going to bother with the exact definitions of what's mental illness versus serious mental illness. And then 23% of adults have mental illness of some sort, so about a quarter of the population. And so as you can see, if you only have, 4% on average of violence coming from mentally ill people, but a quarter of people are mentally ill, that sort of leads us to realize that mentally ill people are actually more safe than non-mentally ill people, which is worth noting. Next, there are a lot of successful people coming out. The star of Deadpool, Ryan Reynolds, talked about his anxiety throughout life. Meghan Markle talked about having suicidal thoughts. The Rock talked about depression. There was Megan Thee Stallion, who raps about anxiety in her 2022 album. Selena Gomez talked about her bipolar diagnosis. And there are also famous people that had mental illness, like President Lincoln. When we look back in historical, there weren't diagnoses of depression back then, but when you read about his descriptions of himself from his diaries and stuff, and other notes about, there's a lot of documentation about presidents, but basically it's accepted that he struggled with depression. He also went through a lot of tragedies, people in his life, including his child dying. I think his wife died. No, maybe it wasn't his wife. No, it wasn't his wife, but his child died. And he had a lot of deaths in the family and a lot of tragedy. So I would just say that, it's really takes a lot of courage, given everything that we just talked about the demonization of mental illness, for these super successful people to talk about their mental illness and show that kind of vulnerability. And I think it's great that we see that mental illness affects everybody, including famous people, but also day-to-day people. And I think their bravery is really helping de-demonize mental health illness so that it puts it in its rightful place, which is a place where it's just a part of the life of, a quarter of Americans to a half of Americans, depending on whether you mean now or during our lifetimes, and realizing that a lot of people are going through mental health struggles. And I like to remind people, and the next time you're dealing with someone who's like really difficult to get along with, just remember you don't know their story and you don't know what they're going through on the inside. And so it's really important to try to be as compassionate as we can. I like to say everybody deserves love and compassion. The people who we think deserve it the least are the ones that need it the most. So the ones that are the most annoying to you are probably the ones who need love and compassion the most. So that said, let's get some transparency on what mental health issues are like, because if you're not familiar with the different types of mental health challenges people face, I think it's good to get a basic education on what people with different types of mental health issues are going through. So depression is persistent sadness where you may feel hopeless, can even lead to suicidal thoughts, and it can be an overwhelming or almost feeling like a perpetual sadness. Depressed people often lose interest in everything, including the things that used to make them the most happy. It leads to reduced socializing, which leads to further depression, and that can create kind of this negative spiral. For some people, it can lead to less eating, and I think for some that it can lead to more eating. And then there's a sense of fatigue from people who are depressed. And I don't think all of these symptoms are necessarily true in all of these slides for every person, but these are the general like things that characterize people in each of these situations. So there can be physical symptoms like aches, pains, digestive problems, not sleeping well, difficulty concentrating is another byproduct of depression. Next is anxiety or disorders, constantly being worried about little things and thinking that there is something that is a threat, even though it's really not a significant threat. Sort of irrational, potentially, is a way to describe it, although I hope that's not rude to say, but maybe an irrational fear or an ungrounded fear. And there can be physical symptoms like your heart beating faster, sweating, shaking, shortness of breath. It can be confused with a heart attack, anxiety. And then, you can have fear of, pretty much anything. Like the phobias are all different types of anxiety. Like, you can have social anxiety, fear of open spaces, which is agoraphobia. And then, there's all kinds of different fears out there if you look up all the phobias. And then restlessness, like the inability to sit still, racing mind of like, oh no, what if this happens? Oh no, what if that happens? And then panic attacks where someone just has this intense fear, which can be really, really bad. And there could be physical symptoms there as well. Next is bipolar disorder. I think it was Selena Gomez that had bipolar disorder. So mood swings where you have a real high, like which is called mania, which is a manic episode where you're like super energetic, euphoric, you feel invincible, and people often take big risks because they feel invincible and make really poor decisions. And then you have these lows, which are the depression, And this is why bipolar is like a swing from up to down and down to up, where you go from mania to depression. And the depressive episodes are everything that we talked about with depression, where you have this huge like sadness and lethargy, like lack of energy and hopelessness. And then there can be impulsivity in the manic phases, again, because you're feeling invincible. And so you might just be impulsive and spend a lot of money or drive recklessly. Substance abuse often goes hand in hand because of that feeling of being invincible, and probably a variety of other reasons. So next is obsessive compulsive disorder. So intrusive thoughts, where you have unwanted thoughts, which are, um, which can cause significant anxiety. And then compulsive behaviors, which are, in order to alleviate the anxiety, you may have some repetitive behaviors. I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that for those of us old enough to remember the movie Rain Man, I think he may have had OCD, but someone tell me if I'm wrong. That's just a guess. Um,
He
and
was he was an
what's that?
idiot. He was an idiot savant.
Okay.
He was based on a real character.
But isn't OCD part of the behavior, the like the compulsive disorder, I thought is
Yeah,
part of the behavior of an idiot savant, no?
yeah, and autism as well. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. So because
Double
like,
word.
he would like repeat phrases and stuff like that. So and so, washing your hands over and over, checking things, counting. I have a friend that has OCD, and he'll like vacuum the rug even though he just vacuumed it the day before and nothing got it dirty. And so, but he'll just vacuum it over and over again to keep cleaning, because that's just something that calms him down. And
Really great example of OCD in a movie is as good as it gets with Jack Nicholson.
mhm,
Really, really good in the
great,
beginning.
thanks. Who's the character? Jack
Um,
Nicholson is the character
Jack
that has
Nicholson
OCD.
plays plays the a romance writer who has OCD. But at the very beginning of it, you get to see all the quirks that he goes through.
Got it.
Especially the washing your hands. Like he opens his cabinet and he's got like 500 soaps, and he takes one with really hot water, then he throws the soap in the garbage and takes another, and
Got
locking the
it.
door in and out like 500 times. Yeah, it's a
Got
lot
it.
of little things.
Um, so the thoughts and behaviors can take up a lot of a person's day, which can interfere with normal day-to-day activities. Next, we talked about PTSD, and I knew someone with PTSD from having been drafted into a war that they didn't want to be a part of. And this is where you have, traumatic events that you went through flash back, or create nightmares, which are intense and distressing. And basically, they may avoid places, people, or activities that remind them of that trauma. And so hyper arousal, which is like, always being on edge and being easily startled, or having trouble sleeping. And then emotional numbness, or being detached from others, which makes it hard to um, like maintain relationships and get close to people. Um, and so yeah. Eating disorders, anorexia, which is when you don't eat, and bulimia, which is when you where you don't eat enough to, where you get super thin, anorexia. And then bulimia is when you throw up. And I've known people with both of these. I also knew someone with like body dysphoria, like a very attractive woman who thought that they were ugly and just saw themselves as very ugly or overweight even when they weren't overweight. And some will see themselves as overweight when they're very underweight. And there's an obsessive focus on food, dieting, and body shape. And that can lead to, not eating enough to stay healthy, binge eating, where you may not eat enough and then you just suddenly eat a ton. And then often the bulimia is when you purge using vomiting or laxatives. Um, I think bulimia is when you vomit. Laxatives I don't think count as bulimia, but I might be wrong about that. But I don't think the
You're
logistics
correct.
matter.
You're correct,
Okay.
Garrett.
So and then the logistics don't matter as much, like the exact definitions, but thanks, Jenny, for helping me there. Physical risks, health risks. You can have a lot of health issues if you don't eat enough. You can have malnutrition, heart problems. There are even famous people, and I don't remember the names of them because I don't follow famous people's stories very well, but have died from anorexia and bulimia. Next is schizophrenia. So I actually had a housemate for a little while that had schizophrenia, and they have misunderstandings about reality. Basically, they may think they have superpowers or that someone is out to get them, paranoia kind of ideas, and they may see, hear, or feel things that aren't there. This person told me that a spider put webs in our common room, like in our living room, and I didn't really know what to make of that, other than I didn't see any spider webs, and I tried to explain that. But I wasn't super familiar with schizophrenia, so I just tried to make my way as it happened, as I interacted with this person. And then most commonly hearing voices is one of the symptoms. Thoughts can become jumbled, making it difficult for them to speak clearly or maintain a train of thought. There can be a lack of emotional expressivity, and difficulty in forming relationships. And with all of these things, it's probably no surprise that basic tasks might be neglected, like personal hygiene, maintaining a job, or socializing normally. And so next is attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, where you can have difficulty focusing, following through on tasks, or um, organizing activity, which creates a lot of mistakes and forgetting to do things. Or you can have hyperactivity, which is an urge to move constantly, even when it's inappropriate, like fidgeting, tapping, or excessive talking. Impulsivity, making quick decisions without thinking about the consequences, which can lead to accidents or social challenges. Um, I told someone one time that I have the opposite of ADHD because I get hyper focused, and I'll sit there and work my way through a meeting and just not even notice the time because I'm having so much fun working. And they said, "No, Garrett, you might have ADHD." And when I researched it, this is the stuff that came up. But when I researched it, actually ADHD can also mean hyper focus. So maybe I do have ADHD. So I don't know. I don't think I do. I haven't been diagnosed, but maybe I do, right? So I actually have to set alarms when I have meetings, because if I don't set an alarm, I just work right through the meeting and I don't pay attention to the time. And next is borderline personality disorder, emotional instability, intense and rapidly changing emotions, often from interpersonal stressors, fear of abandonment, an overwhelming fear of being abandoned and rejected, clinginess and push-pull dynamics where they may pull away. I met someone, I've known actually a couple of people that have borderline personality disorder. And they might be very like clingy and friendly at 1 minute, and then the next they will reject you because you know I don't know the exact logic, but I know that they will be like have a lot of pull and be very kind and caring, and then reject you the next moment. And then they will take reckless actions. One of those two people did have substance abuse issues. Self-harm and suicide are big risks for people with BPD. And an unstable sense of self, meaning like not having clear long-term goals that are relatively fixed. most of us, once we get to a certain adult age, our long-term goals are not super like they're not changing all the time, like goals, values, and self-image. But for people with BPD, it's like there's a lot more internal tumultuousness. Next is panic disorder, which is severe panic attacks that can peak very quickly, often without any noticeable trigger. It can have chest pain, heart palpitations, dizziness, shortness of breath. And people with panic disorders, if you have a panic disorder when a certain thing happens, like say you have a panic disorder on a plane, then you may not want to go on plane trips anymore because there's a feeling that there's a cause and effect. Even if there may not be a cause and effect, there can be a perception that there's a cause and effect. And so people will avoid seemingly normal behaviors because of that panic disorder or because of a past panic attack at a time when that thing happened. So next, 2/3 of Americans with mental health conditions were unable to access treatment in 2021. I mean, imagine if you had the types of mental illnesses that we just described and you were unable to afford treatment for it. Like you have a panic attack, there are medications that help people with panic attacks deal with those panic attacks and be able to cope with them more easily. And you can't afford those medications. You just have to deal with it, right? And how helpless would you feel if you couldn't afford any kind of treatment for those types of mental illnesses? And some people have many of these types of things at one time. I met one person who had, she listed out the number of mental health issues that they had. And it was, I had a lot of compassion for that person because one person going through all that must be just really, really difficult. And so some people have a lot of these things that they're dealing with at one time, not just one at a time. So that was a pretty shocking statistics for me when I was doing the research. So there is a solution, by the way, and I recently learned about it, so I want to share it with people because I'm on a mission to get more people mental health services. There's a type of insurance that doesn't cost an employer anything as long as the employer has at least 10 W-2s making $25,000 a year that gets unlimited counseling, like many medications for free and others at a very deep discount. It costs nothing for the person getting the treatment. It costs nothing for the employer. The employer actually saves money by offering these benefits, and you get a bunch of other side benefits as well. So if anyone knows people at companies like this that are able to get to a decision maker, I would love to get more people access to mental health services. Because when I realized how big of a problem this was actually, I didn't even know about this insurance when I put this on the calendar, because someone had requested that we cover mental health in the FTI. And then interestingly, between the time that we scheduled this and when tonight's session came, I actually learned about this insurance. So, I would love to help more people get mental health coverage that don't have access to it today. It's probably a large percentage of the population that works at companies with at least 10 W-2 employees. So if we could get into every company that does that, we could drastically reduce that number of people that don't have mental health coverage. So that said, I would love to know, did anyone, that's the end of the presentation. Wasn't me. So that's the end of the presentation. Would love to know whether or not people learned anything from this presentation. Was it helpful? Feel free to write in the chat, if you learned something, or a thumbs up, or, whatever you want to do. Thumbs down if you learned nothing and you knew all of this is fine too. Hands clapped is great, Lori, thank you. But we want to provide value to people that come here, and also to society as a whole. That's really what the FTI is about, is adding value to everybody's lives that we can touch. The fourth intention, we have what we call the 5 intentions. The fourth intention is to increase the happiness and decrease the harm of everybody we can influence. with a higher emphasis on the people we can influence more because we can have the biggest impact there. So that said, I'm going to open it up for questions. I will say for the Q&A portion, we basically want to limit each time you raise your hand to one question or comment at a time. Try to keep it to under 3 minutes. And when someone asks a question or makes a comment, anyone's allowed to comment or ask a clarifying question for like under 20 seconds if you're responding to someone who had their hand up. Don't start a new topic. Keep it on the topic of the person who raised their hand. And that lets us have a back and forth dialogue between all of you. And it's not just between me and the person with their hand raised. And I will always respond to the person who has their hand raised, almost always, because I want to make sure that they feel heard. But you know, we do want to have everyone be able to talk with each other. And so with that said, Rogine, go ahead.
Just going to add to that. I have a physical disability, and a fair amount of the time, I think I pass as normal if I wear my ankle braces and a long skirt. But it, it's very common for people to assume that someone with a physical disability they can see has a mental illness problem also in the way they like offer help or react or avoid them. So I was just gonna add that it's like, well, a lot of people have a people with disability phobia.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rogine. And I think a lot of people, and I know for myself, a lot of people don't know how to act around someone with any kind of disability. And I guess, you know, Rogine, my impression as I've gotten older and interacted with more people with more disabilities is to say, act normal, but also act with compassion. And you can tell me if that sounds right or not. I would welcome the feedback. And if you have other suggestions.
Well, with obvious disability, it's just awkward for everybody if you say things that assume you're trying to, assume it's invisible. It's like, and it's pretty much always okay to ask to make it clearer. I would also like to point out, I'm running into this, that as our population is aging, we have so many boomers. It's increasingly frequent that people with dementia are wandering around, maybe not even aware of how much they have changed. And we should have a disability word for that, but yeah, and have been around people who have just almost destroyed groups or who observe doing really inappropriate or dangerous things. So I think we could add dementia to a disability. We don't call it that, but it is. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Rogine. I don't know. I'm going to look up whether or not dementia is a disability. My grandfather had dementia, and you know, it was I can't imagine how hard it was because you know he would sometimes tell me the same story literally 8 times in a row. And I just tried to listen and I smiled and like I can't imagine how disorienting it would be to have that inability to remember what you just said, you know, literally 10 seconds ago. You know, it's like the movie Memento, if anyone has seen that, you know, it's like that, like I thought that was just fiction, but you know, dementia is kind of like that, and he would remember, by the way, things that he did when he was posted on Long Island during World War II, and he would tell those stories vividly, but he couldn't remember what he said 10 seconds ago. So it was a very interesting thing to observe as his grandson. And he was a great man, but has since passed on. So,
My
Carl, oh, go ahead.
my dad would wander off and have no idea how to get home. It
Yeah.
was, yeah. And Alzheimer's and vascular dementia are very different. They present differently as they advance. But anyway,
Got
those
it.
are details. Whether we call it a disability yet as a society, I think it's going to emerge. It's like, yep, that those people are driving.
Yeah, and under legal and medical frameworks, it is considered a disability. And yeah, my grandparents drove way past when they should have been driving. They drove as a team for the most part, and they would keep each other, trying to help each other drive. My grandma liked to be the boss in the driver's side seat, and so yeah, I tried to get them to drive as little as possible. Let's put it that way. And I was fearing for my life when I drove with them. So, but lovely people, but it's very important, if I can put a caution to anyone as you get older, be willing to say, look, at this point, I need someone to drive me around. And part of the problem is, like, they never felt like they had the financial resources, although they did. They grew up in the Depression, but it's important to recognize, do you have the financial resources to be able to take care of yourself? I'm lucky that my father, who shouldn't be driving, is in a town where he gets free transportation. And so, I think we as a community should be providing those kinds of services to people, so that you don't have elderly people feeling like they have to drive just to get to the grocery store and home. And so just that's my 2 cents for let's support those that are getting older and less able to sustain themselves.
And meals for, it's not that uncommon for people who start fires in their kitchen. Anyway, it goes on and on. But it's people who need compassion,
Yep.
just like a schizophrenic.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Agreed, Regine. Thanks. Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out if it was considered a mental health thing. It's definitely in the DSM, so the diagnosis manual that all psychiatrists and psychologists use. So it's definitely, just checked right now, it's listed that dementia is a neurocognitive disorder, NCD, in the DSM-5. I don't know about Alzheimer's, but my stepdad had dementia. He recently passed away in February of this year. So I was privy to all the symptoms. Luckily, he had a lot of help, and he had a caring wife, and she was with him all the time. And when it got out of control, there's a point where they get really aggressive and don't want any help, and they can't control it, and so they need extra help. And luckily, he had hospice care when he passed away. But I wanted to talk about, like, I remember when I was at university, and I was a psych major, and when we took abnormal psychology, the very first thing that the professor said was, be very careful reading the textbook, because you will probably diagnose yourself with every single one listed in there. So I would say,
Yeah, I'm
Garrett,
diagnosing myself with ADHD after the presentation. So
yeah, although I wanted to say, when you mentioned that, I wanted to say, yeah, a symptom of that would be 100 tabs open on your
oh
browser.
yeah, well, you notice I was hiding them, Carl.
Yeah.
For those not aware, I have 100 tabs open in like
Yeah.
10 different browsers each. So
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, I think I kind of suffer from the same thing you are. It's just an issue of being, interested in a lot of things, and
yeah.
then, but So yeah, so one of the things that it was great about your presentation was going through all the different symptoms and stuff. But I could imagine people going, "Oh my God, oh, do I have that? Do I have that? Oh
Yeah, I'm
shit!"
glad you're saying that, Carl. And don't self-diagnose on this stuff. So I should have given that caveat. So I'm glad you're bringing this up, Carl. Don't self-diagnose yourself for this. But if you think you may have one of these mental health issues, see a psychologist, right? Or see a psychiatrist, and they can talk with you and as a professional, diagnose you. I don't know, can a psychologist diagnose as well as a psychiatrist,
Yeah,
Carl? They can,
yeah,
right? So
yeah. The
start with a
psychiatrist is
psychologist. Start with
right.
a psychologist because they can't diagnose they can't prescribe
You
drugs.
can't
And so
prescribe drugs, but they can diagnose. Yeah.
they can diagnose. So a psychologist will be a better place to start, in my opinion, than a psychiatrist. And so yeah, if you're not sure, talk to a psychologist and see if they can give you an objective opinion of a professional who
Also,
knows the
I would
border.
also recommend the DSM actually, even though it's something that's only accessible to psychologists, but it's available. You can get online uh, publications of it, and each one will have the list of symptoms that you must have, like 6 out of 9 or 8 out of 9 or whatever. So it's a good way to, if you would like to double check. But you're right that you should have a professional diagnose you.
I was
That's all.
just gonna say that having a lot of interest is also a sign of ADHD, not to throw another marble into that can.
Yeah, I mean but then my response to that was, well, if inability to focus and too much focus are both ADHD, then what means you don't have ADHD? Is it only like a medium amount to focus is what the non-ADHD? So that's where, I've heard a lot of criticism of ADHD that it's overprescribed. And I kind of, agreed with that when I heard that too much focus and not enough focus are both ADHD. I sort of felt like, hey, like, but again, like,
And if I may add to that, a lot of people actually trying to get the meds actually fake the symptoms because it's easily to fake. However, I discovered recently that they do have a visual and auditory test now. It's a computer auditory and visual test that will actually definitively tell you if you have ADHD, so you can't really fake it anymore.
interesting.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
It's a visual thing with a dot, and it kind of measures how quickly you are to respond or how quickly you lose interest, like you get bored with the thing.
For ADHD?
Yeah. That's
Interesting.
how I got diagnosed actually,
Okay.
last year. Yeah. Because
Cool.
originally I thought that I didn't have it, but and then I was reading the symptoms on the DSM. And I was like, oh, okay, I think I do. And I thought then, oh, so it's going to be like a really easy interview. But then they had me do that test. So I thought that was really interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carl. And thanks, Alex. Peter, go
I
ahead.
was just
Oh,
gonna
go ahead.
mention too, it's a hyper focus in areas that you find interesting, but a lack of focus in things you don't find interesting. So if you don't have any lack of focus, then you probably don't have it.
Well, it depends on what you mean by lack of focus. I certainly don't want to sit there correcting someone's grammar all day. Like, I am not interested in that. I will take a full stop, hard no, not going to do it. But you know, uh, yeah, I definitely don't like to do stuff that I'm not interested in. Not a strength. So I might be ADHD. It's not disrupting my daily functioning, but if it does, then I'll talk to a psychologist and see if I have an official diagnosis and try the dot test. But thank you, Alex, for that clarification. I still don't think that rules me out, is what I'm trying to say. So, and that's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong if I do have ADHD. It's okay. If it does, if it is prohibitive in my life, then I'll see if I need diagnosis and medication. So, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, interesting and it, informative presentation, Garrett, because I was going to just, I guess, use myself and as well as some other sources to kind of extrapolate that, but without going too much into detail, because in the day, as much as I like this group, it's still not like the closest people in my life. But say what I, got to say to get the point across, I've definitely had my share of history of mental health, and, depression was a huge one. I would say the most dominant one. At a point in my life where actually multiple points where I actually had to go to the ER myself, right? Because sometimes you don't have the luxury of just someone, hey, drive me to the ER. And like, what about calling the ambulance? Like, wow, how much debt I'm gonna get into, is and the helicopter, that's even worse. You can get into six-figure debts for medical helicopters in America. Oh, what about calling the police? Okay, well, you see, I'm glad someone asked this question because that's like the most likelihood for you to die. Someone calling the police on themselves or someone else calling the police on another person who had mental health related issues, right? But it's only second to DV, which is domestic violence calls for police. You're like the most likely to get shot and killed in America. And as much as I don't want to put too much burden on the police officers because they do a lot of things, but they definitely sorely lack the training. So that explains why I just went to the ER myself. Okay. So and so that being said, I remember what was this lady who was speaking before Carl was the person raising hand after me, right? Rogine. She said something about compassion. And this reminds me of my own journey on doing, EMDR. Some of you probably will know what that is if you saw a psychologist, where you just follow the finger left and right. And then, millennials are doing the ASMR thing, which is the auditory sensation brain tingling. I've done meditation, like Will suggested. I've also gone into stoicism, dabble into that. But nothing truly replaces with quality connection with other people. I don't know if this is just me or maybe not. And I found my answer on a TED Talk called What Makes a Good Life by Robert Waldinger. He apparently was the fourth generation director for the longest study or adult development study. That the conclusion was quality connection first and foremost. That's the most important thing if you want to live a long and healthy life. And I'll just close it off by saying two other sources without talking too much. Is there's something called the Wisdom of Trauma by a very famous doctor called what was his name again? Gabor Mate. I think that's how you say his name. Gabor Mate, located in Vancouver, BC. And he has this something called Wisdom of Trauma documentary. Highly recommend that. I'll put these sources in the chat in a second. And then last thing I'll say to Rujine's point earlier from how much compassion can truly save a person, like in a literal sense, was from a tech talk that I saw years ago by a man named Aaron Stark with the title of I Was Almost a School Shooter. But he didn't go through with that simply because he had a childhood friend that one day came up to him and said, hey, man, you want to watch a movie? And on the TED Talk, Aaron said, he treated me like a human being, and I just needed that. So instead of being another statistic of a mass shooter in America, he became a father of four and actually teaching these courses and actually working with the FBI on mental health.
Wow. Powerful story. And yeah,
Sources in the chat.
Powerful story. Thank you for sharing. And human beings are social animals. Part of what we do in the FTI is help you create a new friend group. So I agree with you 110%, Peter. I've gone through some pretty lonely times in my life, and the truth is there's a dearth of friendships all across the world. Like almost like the average number of friendships per person is at an all-time low compared to 20 years ago. And so, we have to be very careful of this. I brought this up at past events, but this is the similar sort of situation that Germany was in when the Nazis took power. And because there were so few friendships, the Nazis came in and said, look, we'll be your friend. You just have to agree with our political beliefs. And people were so desperate for friends that, and that they did it. And the Nazi party grew out of this fertile territory of, lack of friendships. And the other thing to mention is that loneliness is actually more harmful to the health than smoking. We think smoking is one of the worst things for our health, but actually being lonely is worse for your health and leads to an earlier death than smoking. So relationships literally are a difference between life and death. So it's really good to have a lot of positive relationships in our lives, people we can lean on and trust. And I think Michael sort of alluded to it earlier, FTI membership, creates a group of friends that, where we all want to be the best version of ourselves, seek truth, and to be fair. And it's a very kind group of people. So agreeing with the 5 intentions, which you can read about in the doc that I just shared. So that said, Rogine, is your hand up again, or did you not put it down? You're on mute.
Okay, sorry, my phone keeps putting me into driving mode. But
That's
anyway,
rude.
oh, I almost forgot what I was. Oh, I was gonna say, relating to what the former speaker said, one of the best periods of satisfying relationships in my life is a small group of us got together, mostly through every place has a, I can't think of the name of it, support group for caregivers for the mentally ill. And we raised money and arranged for training for our police force. It's a small city, but our police force to get training, it's available on how to tell the difference between someone in a mental health crisis or a drug-related crisis, how to identify that and not treat them as some out of control lawbreaker. But the relationships we formed with each other doing that were really great.
Yeah. Oh, you went back on mute, Rogine.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Anyway, the relationships we formed, that was really satisfying.
Mhm.
And it didn't continue forever, but it was a great thing. One friend and I started it.
That's great.
And there is training for police available. I was stunned, but there is. Another police department in Kentucky or something. A guy came and the training was great.
Cool. Thank you, Rogine. Jeannie, you got your hand up?
Yeah, can you hear me? My volume is so low.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. When my son was getting married in Boston about 2 years ago, we were staying at this hotel, funky hotel, it was just very sweet little hotel. And there was a book in the hotel, a 20-page, very short book. And the title of the book was Everybody is Crazy, basically, is what the book was about. And so I read it. Like I said, it's a very short book. And what the book was basically saying is that everybody is basically crazy it would in different ways and to a different degree. But everybody basically thinks that other people are crazy and not us. We don't think we're crazy. We just think everybody else is crazy. But it's a very delightful book, and I wish I remember the title of the book. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Jeannie.
And I was also, for some reason, I was thinking about Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch. And I mean, it was not a book about a psychological, what do you call it? But it's about, the homosexuality and what happened to him.
Yeah.
And in that regard, things have moved, advanced quite a bit. And so we're much more caring and open-minded and understanding of people's, I guess maybe you may even call it disability of some sort.
I don't know if you knew this, Jeannie, but the homosexuality was considered a disorder in the DSM. In previous versions of the DSM, it used to be considered a mental health disorder.
Is that right? But that movie was just so moving, and it was just heartbreaking, that movie.
Yeah,
And
the fact that it was against the law too.
yeah. Yeah.
Did they think he could cure you of the homosexuality too? They thought that you could turn the person rather than.
Well, they still can, Katie. They just shock you enough until you say you're not gay, and suddenly you're not gay anymore. And I
Oh,
like to joke that if they shocked me enough, I'd say I'm not straight anymore, but I'm definitely straight. So, and I'm sorry for my black humor. I hope no one minds that. But it is important because actually, I read about in a book about historical, I forget what it was, like historical psychology. People with mental health issues, before they had modern medications to deal with a lot of this stuff, the cure for things like schizophrenia were a lobotomy. You know, it was like that was what happened. It was just like, whoop, we're cutting the lobes and, prevent
I
the
know.
person from being crazy anymore. And it did prevent them from being a threat. But the truth is, as we learned, like that was all perception. Like I don't think the threat of harm from mentally ill people was any worse back then than it is now. I think people who weren't going through it were just afraid of the people who were going through it because they seemed so out there. And yet, um, now that we better understand things, and to Carl's point, the world is getting better and better at dealing with this stuff. And now we have famous people coming out saying that they have mental health issues to try to de-demonize it. And I've been to startup events where, someone who's a leader in a startup will be like, look, I went through depression. And, like that sort of leads the way for people to say, look, it's okay to say that I'm not mentally healthy right now and I need to get the help I need. And, I have to say, Peter, like kudos to you for thinking of all the things you did to drive yourself to the hospital. Like, and I'm sorry that, thinking about the cost of an ambulance ride had to be one of the things that you were factoring, but wow, you thought about a lot of different stuff there. And, I had no idea that mental health, runs were like the second cause of death for police. And so, yeah,
And there's also one thing that I forgot, but just say this really quickly in under 20
Please.
seconds, Garrett. I think this is really important, is that
Yeah.
I was quite hesitant to even go to the hospital. I mean, drive myself. And that's because and this is not an assumption, this is like an actual thing, at least in this country, is that when you have certain records with the hospital of certain things, like I'm not talking about constipation and stuff, I'm talking about like mental health issues and,
Right.
ER, and when they cuff you at the railing of a bed, just like one of those horror movies, right? But except for you're in it, there is the downside is it might affect your future employment,
Mhm.
and that is scary. And some people might
That is
not even
scary.
do that because, like, I can't get a job, I'm not doing this.
Right. Yeah, I know jail can do that. I didn't know that mental health. Now, I think that with mental health things, you have to disclose them. I don't know if they can search your medical records without your permission, because that should be a HIPAA
No,
violation.
that's against HIPAA. But so for
Yeah.
me, it's not the case.
In the
But for
US.
some people, but this is a legitimate concern. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that would be scary, right? That adds a whole nother reason for people not to share what they're going through. And guys, you heard me read all these symptoms of what people go through with these mental health issues, and a lot of you have been through them. And honestly, I've been through depression too. I don't think it was like severe depression, but I've been through depression, and it's hard. Like it's very hard. And I think that's why I say the next time you're dealing with someone who's difficult to, like being difficult to get along with, just remember you don't know what that person's going through. You don't know if they're going through one of the things that like depression, like I guess maybe I'm biased because I've been through it. I think a lot of those other things would be harder to go through than depression, but depression's pretty damn hard too. So, who knows, right? There's always the grass is greener, or the grass is darker. I'm not sure which, but anyway, so Rogine, go ahead.
Grass is darker. I like that.
Sorry, Rogine, you're on mute.
This
Keeps
is
putting you
making-
on car mode, right?
Yeah,
What's up
and
with
I
that?
don't know
Don't talk to
why.
the Zoom gods.
Yeah, this is
Are
crazy.
you actually moving, Rogine? Maybe when you're in a bus or something?
Turn your Bluetooth off, Rogine. Turn Bluetooth off on your phone.
Yeah, it took me a while to find that. It turns that on automatically too. I don't know. I will fool around with it. This is pretty new. Um, I will, yeah, you might see this. I was very type A and probably ADHD and focus until I was about 50. And it served me really, really well. Um, and it turned out I was bipolar, but I didn't really have the depressive episodes. I was on manic pretty much all the time, collapsing on an occasional weekend. And I've learned since then that, especially for kind of tech workers and especially women, that about age 50, your body won't do it anymore. I wish I'd known that when I crashed, but it's not uncommon. It's like, geez. So it's dangerous to stay in manic hyper focused mode for too long because it ripped up my body and my body just wouldn't do it anymore. So a word of caution that bipolar and ADHD can serve you really well. So being extremely successful in a tech field, it was great. It was great. I'd probably do it again, but the crash was not great.
Yeah, sorry to hear about that. But you know, they're yeah, the highs and the lows. Mike, sorry, go ahead.
It was great while it lasted.
Yeah, I hear
And it
you,
was,
Regina.
oh,
You know, and
Tangential, tangentially, but was mentioned in the last discussion. The book, Everyone is Crazy Except You and Me, and I'm not sure about you, was written by a guy named Lionel. And Lionel didn't have a first name, although that's later been uncovered as he was another Michael William LeBron. But he appeared on as Lionel Jefferson on All in the Family, and had a brief career as in the Lionel Show and on the Jefferson Show. And he is alive and well and living in Florida. And he, for a time, he was going to be a Jesuit priest. And I don't know for sure whether he's black, although he played a black person on the Jeffersons. And that's a good book. Everybody's crazy except you and me. Now, although I'm limited to one thing, I have something to say about Alan Turing of the Imitation Game. He was probably one of the most responsible people for winning World War II in the Atlantic. Although the bomb was responsible for winning World War II in the Pacific. And he was the guy who cracked the German code. And he was driven to suicide by being chemically castrated, because his inspiration for living was his being an inactive, well, what do you call it, a non-practicing homosexual. No one knows for sure whether he ever had homosexual relationships, but he was a non-practicing homosexual. And at times in my life, I've been a non-practicing heterosexual, and I have had, well, that's probably another story. But Turing was a brilliant guy who basically came up with the architecture for modern computers, although a few people say they're responsible for that. And he did it without with relays rather than and stepping switches, which were the computers at that time used in the telephone industry and a number of other things. So Alan Turing in the Imitation Game has a very deep underlying story, although the book and the movie are carry a little bit different story. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And if I can, I was going to tell some of that, but I want to, but I'm really glad you did. And the other thing I wanted to joke is that, you know, I like to say I've never met a normal person. Like, I don't even know what a normal person looks like. I'm weird. I think every person that I've met is unique. And this becomes a little political because you know, the word snowflake is used as a pejorative term by conservatives for liberals, saying you think you're unique. And I'm kind of like, I'm not a liberal, but yeah, I think I'm unique. I think you're unique too, by the way.
He's
And
unique.
you know, I think everybody's unique. We're all human beings, and the physicalists probably won't agree with me, but I think we all have a spirit in our core, and that is a unique thing that makes us us. It's what makes us unique. And even if they don't agree with the spirit part, we at least have unique genes. Although if you're part of an identical twin, then theoretically you don't have unique genes. You have the same genes as an identical twin, but when they do studies of identical twins, they still turn out very differently in some ways. So there's still got to be something else going on there, right? So the other thing that I wanted to mention about Alan Turing, which is very prescient of today, and I'm digressing a little bit because we have a lot of time, and I think we've covered a lot of mental illness, and I'm still happy to cover more. But it's worth noting that Alan Turing came up with something called the Turing test, which is a test that think about when and let me tell you when he came up with this. It was in 1950, and keep in mind the context of you know whether or not you know you would understand like this level of information. Here, quick. Whether or not you would understand this level of information in 1950. Alan Turing said in 1950, before modern computing had been invented, and as Mike said, he was one of the inventors of modern computing. He said, the day that technology can actually imitate a human being so well that a human being interacting with that technology can't distinguish between which thing they're interacting with is a human being versus technology, that's what's called the Turing test. When technology becomes so advanced that it can't pass between those two. I can't do this right now. You do it. You choose.
This is where we are right now with AI.
And actually, what I was going to say is there was a Turing test done between customer support team members. Do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Sorry, my 7-year-old daughter is trying to help them in a game. Trying to get me to help them in a game. So basically in this study, they were comparing customer support people to an AI. And not only was the AI not distinguishable from the humans, the AI was considered more human than the humans. That's not just passing the Turing test, it's blowing it away. And I was an AI specialist in, you know, a top 10 global computer science program, and I never thought the Turing test. And I spoke at a futurist event, so I'm something of a futurist myself. But I never would have guessed when I was in college that the Turing test would be passed in my lifetime. You know, and I'm pretty bullish on like what technology is going to do, like I am, but the way that AI has advanced is really, really impressive in a very good way, but also in a scary way. And we've talked about my concerns about AI and the boundaries at which I think it's good and no longer good, but that's another story for another day. That said, I'll let Carl go next.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Ex Machina, the movie, a really good movie that actually
Yeah.
focuses on the test. I remember when he's a oh that's Genie. I remember when there was a period in the very beginning when the AI was coming up, and there was a Google engineer who was saying that he had a conversation, and they posted the dialogue that he had, and how it seemed sentient and wanted rights and all that stuff. And I remember reading that whole interview, and I was like, damn. I mean, I couldn't distinguish that there was a machine.
Yeah, but I think there might have been some misunderstanding there, because what it turned out is that I read that article, and what it turned out is that he only posted bits and pieces selectively of his conversation, and there was a lot of AI prompting where he was basically prompting the AI to act that way. And if you
I-
prompt AI to do certain things, it will do those things because it is obedient. And current AI is obedient, which is good. If AI ever becomes disobedient, we should be concerned, especially if it does so of its own, theoretically hypothetical free will. Although I would call it pseudosentient will. But yeah, that I think that was a fiction that was made out to be different than it was. Yeah.
But the comment that I wanted to make, kind of
Sorry.
you alluded earlier to before, which is this idea of not knowing what what they're suffering from, or their past, or their background. And so the default mode to me, like, should be just assume that just treat everybody with compassion, right? And think of the fact that even if somebody who's, quote, psychopath, sociopath, evil, disorder, whatever, just go all the way up to when they were a baby, and imagine, like, okay, from the moment they were a baby, which to me mean, clean slate, innocent, right, normal human being, and to get to that point, and whatever it is, whether it was their parents, their trauma, their past, their food, their upbringing, their economic status, that there's always a reason for where they are today. And to not judge somebody. I mean, that's the problem, that we're very quick to judge. And then the last thing I wanted to say regarding that it's kind of, it would be an interesting debate as to what is normal and what is crazy. Like, how do you know that you are normal and everybody is crazy? Or how do you know that you're crazy and everybody else is normal? Or anybody you see out there that says, oh, they're normal, but you don't know, right? And what's the difference? So I think that would be really interesting how can you tell, So assume that everybody is kind of sick in a sense, but still functioning.
So, Carl, medically speaking, there's no such thing. And a lot of normal when it comes to other than medical is pretty much just a bandwagon fallacy.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
It's a way of creating an us versus, I'm sorry, Peter, you go ahead.
The bandwagon fallacy is not us versus them. Bandwagon fallacy is, so for example, when you have a conversation with a theist and you go, why spaghetti noodle monster is not a god? They're most likely to say because that's not what most people consider that. So essentially, that is an example of bandwagon fallacy. What if the majority says must be true? And that's not always true. The majority of people back in history thought the Earth was the center of the universe.
And yeah. And the majority thought that the Earth was flat, including certain groups today who are still believe that. So, yeah.
Wait, you're not a round earther, are you, Carl? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm a flat earther. Yeah, you guys are all deluded that the Earth is flat, man.
I know, like, you must be crazy, Carl. You think the Earth is round? Come on. It's actually not round, just to be fair. It's an oblate spheroid. It is an oblate spheroid. So, sorry. I'm silly sometimes. So, and I don't make fun of many people, but I will make a little bit of fun of flat earthers, a little bit. Although there was a great article that I saw which said flat earthers spend $30,000 of their own money to prove Earth is flat and end up agreeing that it's round and proving themselves wrong. And I'm like, if only every flat earther would actually have that level of dedication. I really give them a lot of kudos for, like, A, putting their own money in, and then B, admitting they were wrong once they realized they were wrong. So most people just double down on wrong. One thing, Carl, psychopaths are supposedly, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but psychopath is not a term usually used anymore, I don't think, but the people that were classified as psychopaths were supposedly born that way. The sociopaths are the ones that come about that way because of trauma. And I did have a guy that I used to interact with that was a sociopath and a narcissist. It's a hard combination. Um, and um, and so I don't know if that's true that anyone is really born that way, though, to be honest. I would be surprised if anyone is, but that's my understanding, so I'm going to repeat it even though I don't believe it. And then the other thing is as far as like your point about try to understand people have a reason for getting to where they are, I think that's really good. And I think giving people the benefit of the doubt is called the assumption of positive intent, which I learned in a corporate training. There aren't many corporate training things that I remember, but it's that the assumption of positive intent is assume that someone has the most positive possible perspective that they could possibly have, given the perspective that they're in and the way that they interact with you. Whereas the assumption of negative intent is assuming they have a negative intention. And we should always give someone the assumption of positive intent, because wouldn't we want them to give the same to us? Because there's so often, and actually studies show that 90% of conflict comes from misunderstanding. And it's usually people assuming negative intentions when really there were positive ones behind it. And so the the sort of semi joke that I give is when I see someone driving like crazy, and remember I said my grandparents drove way past when they were supposed to drive, right? So when I see someone driving like crazy, I imagine that's my grandparents in the car. They're people like my grandparents, obviously not my grandparents, they've passed, but people like my grandparents that are good-hearted people, and they're doing their best to drive, but they have to get by and they don't feel like they can get by. My grandparents could have gotten by without driving, but with the scarcity that they grew up in, they felt like they had to save it all up until the last minute. And to be fair, they, after all the healthcare in their later life, they did use all their money because they were Depression era people. So they never invested in the stock market. They were afraid of the crash of 29. So they had all their money in a bank.
So
Which,
right along that idea of positive intent, I think I was saying, maybe you could phrase it as, whenever I encounter another human being, like my immediate thought is, okay, there are whatever the positive of a human being is, and it's okay, positive human, until they exhibit evidence that they're not. And even then I always say, oh, I wonder what the reason is. You know what I mean?
And what could they be going through that may cause them to act that way, right? And until you ask thoughtful questions, and my response now is like, hey, is everything okay? Right? And when I ask those questions, I've had people go, you know what? No, it's not okay. And F you, because this is what I'm going through. And I'm like, wow, I'm really sorry to hear that, right? And then we get into a real conversation about what's really going on. And, I've had people that were swearing at me that became friends later because, instead of swearing back at them louder or in a more, negative way, I responded with compassion. And I think, I'm not always that way. I try to be that way as much as possible, but, I think more of us need to absorb negativity and respond with positivity, because wouldn't we want other people to do that when we're having a really crappy day? And so, what's
Or
that?
platinum rule. It's the golden rule or the platinum rule. It's like
It's the platinum rule. And someone mentioned that earlier, and I don't think I mentioned to people what the platinum rule is. So the platinum rule is to treat other people the way they want to be treated, although that can be abused by someone who doesn't reciprocate the platinum rule. So I give a little caveat that I add my little 2 cents to it. It's treat other people the way they want to be treated, as long as there's not a good reason not to. Because if someone wants to take advantage of me and they know I follow the platinum rule, they could be like, all right, Garrett, go do my laundry, make me dinner, come, give me all your money. Like, and I'll be like, wait a minute, I think I have a good reason not to do all this. Like, now, unless it's like my mother and she needs the help, then I'll do those things. But anyone
I
else.
thought you were
Sorry.
kind and compassionate, Garrett.
I know, but apparently not compassionate enough to give all my money away to a total stranger. So people from Nigeria have tried that, and I wasn't compassionate enough. So and then, by the way, I joke, but I have a team member in Nigeria. So not all Nigerians are scammers, by the way. Some of them are good developers. So uh and I actually tried to hire a scammer from Nigeria that I got to out themselves as being a scammer. And I said, look, I'll give you a job, like a real legitimate, honest to God job, but you have to actually work. And he gave a verbal yes, but never actually followed through, unfortunately. But I was trying my best to convert a white collar, I don't know if you would call that white collar criminal, anyway, I tried to convert him to an honest,
Con man. They're
with
con
that.
men. A con man.
Yeah, he was a con man. I tried to convert him to an honest living, but I failed on that one. So, but I tried my best. And I like to tell everybody, don't stress, just do your best and accept the rest. Follow my own advice.
You're talking about Nigerians, and I've had a scam. I was scammed by an Indian. So whenever I think of scammers, I think of Indians.
Well, there are scammers all over the world. There are American scammers too. There are probably Australian scammers. Like every country's got scammers. And that's where I like to say the only generalization that's generally safe to make is that generalizations are generally unsafe to make. You can't make generalizations. You have to judge each person as an individual, and you have to vet each person no matter where they're from, what they look like, who they are. You have to understand who they are, get to know them better, and get to know how much you can trust them. And if they're
Yeah, of course.
trustworthy, start to trust more. And but looking at someone and saying because their skin color is X or because they're from X country, therefore I will have Y judgment, not fair, right? Not fair to them.
Right, of
You
course.
wouldn't want someone to do that to
But
you.
it's interesting when you have an experience with like when you
get
when
it.
I actually had an experience with an Indian couple of Indians who scammed me on my computer, and your instant reaction is, oh, he's an Indian, so I better be careful.
No, I get it.
You're
That's
absolutely right
psychology.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's psychology, Jenny. And I've been scammed by, people, I've been scammed by Indians too, but my best developer is in India. So, and half my team is in India. But that's where, I don't care that the people I was scammed with were of X skin color or from X country. I just care that that person was a scammer and therefore I'm no longer going to trust them. And once I learned they were a scammer, then I confronted them, and then that went one way or another, and sometimes a good way and sometimes a bad way. So that said, Mike has had his hand up and Alex has been patient for after Mike. So Mike, good to hear from you, buddy. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Maybe a diversion and not on today's subject, but the test of the Turing test is kind of an infinite test that doesn't converge. So what they've done, people have said that our system passes a Turing test. They've taken a panel of judges, and if 3 out of 5 of them agree or some percentage agree, they say our system has passed the Turing test, supposedly impartially. There is a framework that's been discussed in ACM's journal that a guy named Jacob Saad, SAAD, has devised a scoring system so you can describe whether a particular one kind of a benchmark to tell whether one AI system is better than another, and that's in a level of discussion. There is a problem that goes on in AI that's comparable to the problem in mathematics and analysis of whether you've got a local minimum or a local optimization or global optimization, whether you're caught up in a local minimum or a local maximum. And that supposedly the Turing test is thought of as being modified to take care of that problem in quantum computing. So that's an active field of discussion right now for those who may be and I guess several people here are on the frontier of IT work. that goes on in IT work. So I
Mike,
yield
I'm
the balance
curious
of
to
my
know
time.
where you're getting your definition of the Turing test, because the ChatGPT definition just basically says, what I said before, and that whoever is judging whether or not the person they're interacting with is human or machine, if they can't consistently accurately distinguish between which is human and which is machine, then the machine passes the Turing test. So that was the ChatGPT response, and that was my recollection from when I learned about it in college. But if you have another source, I would love to see it to see if I might be
But
wrong.
Garrett, that is a machine telling you that.
But Carl, I'm a machine. Oh wait.
We can't prove
And-
that anyone
and
here is
now
not
Ex
even
Machina.
conscious.
Well,
Yeah.
the problem is, and to be honest, I was actually, you're not going to believe me on this, but I'm telling you the truth that I was thinking about the scenario that we're in today, where you can't distinguish between machine and human in the 1990s. I was like, someday it's going to be a problem where you can't distinguish between human versus machine, and we're going to have some identity methodology, back, before the internet was a thing, before I'd even heard of the internet. It was still ARPANET then, or at least
Like-
not public internet. And, but I was into technology because I was a futurist from an early age. And like, I was into technology because I knew it would revolutionize the world before it even had. But this stuff is like, it's a story still being played out. Let's put it that way. There's still a lot more to be explored and a lot more to be understood. So that said, I want to let Alex.
Garrett, I have
Yeah, go
a very
ahead.
quick question.
Yeah,
When you say Turing, is that Turing test? Is that based Alan Turing? Is that Turing?
Yeah,
as in
Alan Turing, Turing.
Yeah,
Alan
I
Turing.
know. But that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Imitation Game movie was based on
Yes.
Alan Turing, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
and he's the one that Mike was talking about, that was homosexual but was bullied and committed suicide. Yeah, that was the
Right.
guy.
I was talking about that.
Yep. You and Mike were both talking about him. Yeah. So Alex, would love to hear what you have to say, or questions, thoughts, anything you want to say.
Sure. On the topic of AI, there's an app I use all the time for mental health that actually includes a chat box that will help you solve through your current mental health crisis. And it's really, really good. That's which I don't know if that's scary or great, but the
I
app,
believe it was developed by a psychologist. I think I saw a piece on 60 Minutes about it.
yeah, it's actually based on the CBT, so it's very good. It's called Clarity. And on the other point, I think we talked about what is normal versus what is not normal. In I think the way that psychology defines it is through 4 Ds: deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. So deviance would be the bandwagon. If your behavior is much different than everybody else, that would be considered abnormal. Distress, does it cause you a lot of distress? Dysfunction, does it prevent you from functioning as a member of society and getting done what you need to get done? And is your behavior dangerous to you or to society? So I think that's the official
It
way
is, yeah.
of looking
Yeah.
at it.
I'm gonna, yeah, I'm surprised that I
Well,
didn't mention.
Well, I think that's a fairly good definition. We also have to remember a man that someone mentioned a little earlier tonight, or alluded to a little earlier tonight. His name was Galileo, and he was a deviant of his time. He said that, Earth's not flat. We're, like, we're not, going around, the sun is not revolving around the Earth. We have a different paradigm here. And he was a deviant. And so
But it was only one out of 3 though.
What's that?
It's only 1 out of 3. In
Yeah,
other
I
words,
forget which one was Galileo. I'm sorry.
like he wasn't distressed, he wasn't dysfunctional in society, and he wasn't a danger to others, as far as I know.
Okay.
But you're right. And anybody who comes up with an idea, right,
Yeah.
that is crazy would be deviant for sure. But you have to have at least 3 of the 4 to be considered
Deviant.
mental, or like in need of help. Yeah.
Got it.
And I definitely don't like the deviant side either, since I've always been a bit of a weird individual.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
I mean,
why,
we only the 3 Ds, because I agree about the other 3, especially distress.
yeah, I would just say like the people who pass for normal, even though I joked that no one is normal, the people who pass for normal are far less interesting than those of us that are weird, right? Like we're all here tonight because we're interested in intellectually interesting conversation. We've been talking about intellectually interesting things. Most normal people would probably consider this a super boring conversation. Why would you guys bother? But it's what we like, right? And so that's why we're here. And let's keep having these conversations, and let's try to explain to them why these things are in their best interest to think about. And maybe they'll be convinced and maybe not. And I like to say, if not in this life, maybe they will in the next life when they're a little bit more closer to enlightenment. So, that said, that's not meaning to be judgmental, but it's that we're all on a spiritual path and different people are at different places in that spiritual journey. And so we all have different interest areas and things that we need to learn, in our place that we're at right now. So that said, you said that clarity is built on CBT. CBT is also built on Stoicism, which I forget if I mentioned earlier, but we have an FTI Stoa, and we did on Sunday our first introduction to the FTI Stoa. And so for anyone interested in CBT and Stoicism, Stoicism is not like it's starting to get a little bit more accuracy in terms of the way that it's representative, but like it's not stuffing down your emotions and ignoring them. That's not what Stoicism is about. It's a very, great fountain of wisdom for anyone interested in having reason be the highest good. If you like Buddhism, because Buddhism holds reason as the highest good, so does Stoicism, and they both have a lot of great wisdom. So if anyone's interested in joining our Stoic events, let me know. We will advertise them in the FTI meetup, and I'll post another link of FTI links, including the meetup. And if you join the FTI meetup, you'll get invited to all our events. That said, I want to hear from Katie. So thanks, Alex, for your comments.
Yeah, I wonder what Alex
Just a moment. The highest good for
to think about my
Stoics is
comment. I
virtue.
think
Sorry, Katie. Give Regine 1 second. I think she wanted to
sure.
respond to what we were on.
I was just going to say the highest good for Stoics is virtue. And reason is a good way to get there. That's all.
Yeah, so the 4 virtues are the highest good for Stoics, but the way that they came to those 4 virtues is through reason, and the way of interpreting those 4 virtues is through reason, not through intuition or emotion. That said, I think intuition has its place, and we had another event on intuition versus reason. But yeah, I think we could ask some of the the folks that are Stoic authors that about that for more clarification, Regine. And Joe and I are both friends with a couple of Stoic authors that are fairly prominent. But thank you, Regine. Like it is, yeah. I don't know if it's disputed. I'll look it up when Katie is talking about whether or not it's accepted that reason is one of the highest goods in Stoicism. So
I think there's a lot of overlap between Stoicism and Buddhism, actually.
there is, and actually the early Stoics, and I learned this from Massimo, who's a very famous Stoic, that the early Stoics actually went to India, where the Buddha was from, and probably learned a lot about Buddhism, because I think the Buddha had died by the time Zeno went to India. And so most likely Stoicism borrowed a lot from Buddhism. So Buddhism was the original, and Stoicism is the very good, like, interpretation of a lot of, and also building on top of, they say we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Stoicism was standing on the shoulders of giants back in ancient Greece. So go ahead, Katie.
I was gonna say, I think with dysfunction, for me, it seems like with a lot of people, like if they can't hold a job, that seems to me like that's kind of what I haven't researched it a lot, but that seems to me that might be the gateway to someone having deeper problems if they can't, um, if they
Yeah,
can't.
Yeah, that would be the two Ds. It would be dysfunction and distress if you can't hold a job, I think.
But let's say you can't hold a job because of a physical disability, right? At that point, that wouldn't be abnormal behavior. So it's always taking them all together, I suppose.
And you could also wonder why some people burn out much quicker than others.
Not enough sleep, quite frankly. I'm telling you, it's not enough sleep because I've worked over 80 hours every week, usually over 100 hours for 7 years. I generally burn out no more than once a quarter since I've been making a point of taking naps when I'm sleepy. I haven't burnt out for over a year now. So, enough sleep prevents burnout. Healthy
As soon as you said that
relationships,
kind of
enough
works,
sleep, and a bunch of other
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
Gary, as soon as you said that, thanks for saying the specific hours per week, but as soon as you mentioned that, I'm not saying there can't be exceptions, but the only thing that comes to mind is either you're like an emergency medical doctor or you're like an entrepreneur that just
Entrepreneur.
very busy. Because a lot of
Yes.
people say, I want to be entrepreneur because it's going to be more chill. Like, no, you're going to be working as hard as a doctor.
Well, if they want to be an entrepreneur that's on what's it called? Welfare, they can entrepreneur on welfare and be chill. Sorry, but like, I could be on welfare if I wasn't married and filing jointly, but maybe I'm not that bad. But like, it takes a lot to make a lot of money as an entrepreneur. So, you got to work hard, and it doesn't come from being chill. It comes from working hard. And I'm working hard not to make myself a millionaire, but to like help make a lot of other people money. And that's my first and foremost goal, is to make other people money. In fact, I make more money for my employees than I do for the company. So that said, Tien, would love to hear from you. Welcome.
Yeah, I thought with stoicism, I thought that was a lot about like emotional control and like emotional mastery.
So emotional mastery is part of it. But emotional mastery, you're saying it the right way. It's about mastering your emotions, not being a slave to your emotions. And Shakespeare talked about this in Hamlet. Let the man who is not emotion slave. Wait, show me the man that is not shoot, now I'm blanking on the quote from Hamlet. Show me the man that is not emotion slave, and I will hold him to my heart's court, something like that. And it's about what's that?
Ask ChatGPT.
I know, but I'm too slow to do ChatGPT. I'm just trying to do it from mine. I normally have that one memorized, even though my memory is terrible. But because I love Hamlet, and Shakespeare's my favorite author. But yeah, it is about emotional mastery. Part of Stoicism, which I posted the quotes for Rogine. Stoicism does consider reason, which in Stoicism is called logos, as like one of the cores of Stoicism. Good to see you, Rogine. Hope you have a good night. And it is about emotional mastery, Tien. It's about, how do I say this? It's about not giving into emotional compulsions, but to understanding, and I'm adding a little bit of my own philosophy into this. I try to say it's about understanding where your emotions are coming from at the root cause, which is like if you look at why you feel emotions, acknowledging your emotions, understanding your emotions, why are you feeling those emotions? And then what I say is plant the seeds of happiness emotionally and pull out the weeds of harm emotionally. when you're looking at the root cause, then you create a happy life for yourself. Because instead of giving into your emotions, which usually means to make a bad decision, like pretty much emotional compulsions are almost always bad decisions. Try to think of examples of emotional compulsions, and they're almost always bad decisions. Generally, it's better to be calm, cool, and collected, think about things and understand why you're feeling that emotion and deal with the root cause of the emotion rather than give in to what the emotion compels you to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. Come on if
Actually,
you speak.
Teen, if you read, I think Rogine posted a lengthy thing on stoicism, and one of them is eudaimonia, flourishing.
That was me.
Oh, that was you posting it?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
that's okay.
So Garrett, yeah. So read Garrett's thing on stoicism. Flourishing is one of them. Yeah.
I did get to that one on ChatGPT because, you know, I've always considered reason to be one of the highest goods of stoicism. And so she challenged me. So I wanted to fact check myself and, you know, look for reasons I might be wrong. So Will, go ahead.
In Grand's view as well, that reason was the highest good.
Well,
objective.
Ayn Rand did believe that, but she had a lot of misunderstandings about the logical implications of reason. But she was a very interesting person, and I really loved her books. They were very influential for me in college. And then I realized that she was wrong half the time as I got older. So, but she was right half the time. So, and I love the way she glorifies business. I think that part she was right about. You know, people who are business people that are not greedy business people are actually solving and even greedy business people are solving a real business, like a real human need. If a business person's not solving a human need, they can't sell their product because no one will buy it. Because if you're not helping someone in some way, you know, unless you have a monopoly, no one's going to buy your product if there's competition. But I would argue that the logical implication and the rightful place of capitalism is what I call generous capitalism, which if people want, I can go into in a minute. But I want to let Will go next.
Thanks, Garrett.
Sure.
Yeah, it's really great topic, really important topic. I was just thinking the things we think we need are often we don't need, like junk food and sugar.
Yes.
And they're all billion-dollar, trillion-dollar industries, and they're sort of based on insanity because they're actually making us ill. So because there's a need there doesn't necessarily mean it's justified, I would argue. But I think the most important thing, or very important thing with mental health is that you address it before the problems come along, because it's not till we fall in the hole that we sort of realize we need to find a way out. And they don't teach you this stuff in school, you know, like you're on your own when you find one day, you know, you've been hit by the bus, psychologically speaking, and nobody prepared you for that. So like, I think that's why it's really important to maybe adopt mindfulness or something like that to stay healthy, try and really look after your mental health before the problems arise, and they should teach it in schools. And that Orlando, the group that Rogine was referring to, that's the Orlando Stoics. So I introduced you to Stoic Dan. You met him.
Yes, he's awesome.
Yeah, so
really
that's
like meeting him.
Yeah, Rogine and I are in that group, but every second they meet twice a week, and every second one they do a Buddhist. So that's Orlando Stoics, but every second week they do a Buddhist thing. So they're sort of into, and Stoic Dan's been elected into the World Stoicism Council. He's got a paid position on the World Stoicism Council.
Cool.
And he's integrating, I think, subtly a little bit of the Buddhist philosophy with the Stoic philosophy, which, as you said, the two are very closely related. And the other thing I was going to say was, while we're talking about being a little bit maybe unusual, perhaps you could do, maybe it's time we get into aliens and consider, you know, make an interesting topic. Aliens, do we believe they're there? Anyone had any experience with them? I mean, I recently learned that there are 800 billion planets, conservative estimate, in the Milky Way alone, 800 billion planets. And if there have indeed been infinite Big Bangs, then that's infinite possibility for intelligent life forces to have emerged. So I mean, maybe we haven't even scratched the surface.
You know what I
course
love, Will,
out there.
Of
is
course not.
you come to my events and then you reiterate my arguments, not realizing that they're my arguments.
Which was your one?
The both of those, that the universe is infinite and that there are infinite chances of sentient life in the infinite universe. And even if we look at our universe, I can pull up the slide from the presentation where I talked about the number of planets in the universe, or the known universe. Here it is. It's a 2 with what is it? It's a 2 with a lot of zeros after it. And so this was the presentation I gave. 2 with a lot of zeros after it.
Is that all?
What's that?
Is that all?
I know, right? That's all. So to think that there are that many planets and that there would only be one planet with life is a little improbable. I mean, like, really? So
Yeah,
But I mean,
yeah.
even in the Milky Way, there's 800 billion, so 4/5 of
Yeah.
1 trillion just in the Milky Way, and the nearest other solar system to ours is only 1 light year away.
I'm not trying to give you a hard time, Will, by the way. I just think it's nice that eventually we agree after you've processed what I've said, and then you come back to me. You actually agree with me, even though you disagree with me whenever I present this stuff, but then you come back and present it back to me.
No, Garrett, for a start, I wasn't at that meeting. And secondly, I would never disagree with that because I've thought that all my life.
Good, good.
You know what,
And
Will?
Yeah, pardon?
I can briefly respond. Will, technically, we are all aliens because we are made of stardust. We were seeded here from other planets or
That's not
other.
what that's not
Yeah.
what alien means though. So alien means having been born on another planet.
Ah,
And so you know,
okay.
yeah. But
Being
anyway,
non-human is what you're saying.
yeah, I mean,
Make for an interesting topic anyway.
non-human, like dolphins are non-human, but they're not alien because they were born on Earth. So other animals are non-human, but they're born on Earth, so they're still not aliens. But
Some
an
people-
alien has to be born on either an alien, actually, I believe the definition is that an alien can't have been born on Earth.
Right.
In which case,
Extraterrestrial.
yeah.
That makes
And
sense.
so now in English vernacular, an alien just means, in American vernacular, an alien just means born in another country. So if you're Spanish, you're an illegal alien, and so the Japanese call it gaijin, like you're an alien. It's the same word as someone born from another planet. You're born from another country, you might as well be from another planet. So we do that in America, other countries do that too, but really technically alien probably means born on another planet, or not born on this planet actually. And so if God exists, God is an alien because God wasn't born on Earth most likely, unless you count Christ, and maybe then God was born on Earth. That gets complicated. But anyway, if I could do a quick, well, let me let Jenny go, and then if we have no hands up, I'll talk about generous capitalism for anyone that's interested in hearing it.
Yeah. In terms of earthly verbiage and earthly terminology, I just think that, Garrett, you are like the ultimate overachiever in whether it be psychologically, mentally. I mean, I just find you so amazing.
Thank you, Jenny.
How did
You're
you come
actually,
that way?
I find you to be too kind.
No. You're just. I just find you just so very amazing. Yeah.
The check is in the mail, Jeannie.
Yeah. Whatever. Yeah.
Actually, Garrett, I just had a thought when you were talking about the uniqueness of humans and including twins, identical twins. I don't know if you knew this, and I don't know if it's true or not, but a fun fact is that identical twins who are genetically identical have different fingerprints.
Interesting.
So I don't
different
know
what,
how
Carl?
that's, what's that?
They have different what? Sorry.
They have different fingerprints.
Oh,
Identical twins have different fingerprints from each other.
well, that's handy if one commits a crime, then, right?
Yes, it is. But then it makes you wonder, like, how does that happen? I wonder if they have different palm readings as well, like different
Yeah,
lines.
it's weird.
This is a thing for the physicalist to explain.
Yeah.
Not say genes are the only thing that determine who we are, you know,
Makes you
and
think, like, what is the purpose of fingerprints? Like why, evolutionary speaking?
well, I don't think that's evolutionarily like fingerprints are an evolutionary thing. Like we have a modern use for the uniqueness of fingerprints for security purposes, but I don't think that having a unique fingerprint was an evolutionary, like to have identical
Hasn't
twins
been
have
selected
different
for.
fingerprints wasn't an evolutionary advantage per se. It just happens to be that way. I think it's coincidental rather than intentional.
That'd be worth
So one thing I'm going to make a quick plug for generous capitalism, which is what I advocate for. And we had another event on this. And you can tell we have a lot of events because I keep referring to other events, but you just have to come to our YouTube channel and check out Freethinker Institute on YouTube. And we have a lot of past events. Generous capitalism means that a company is more generous, and my company tries to be a generous capitalist company, Play Rate. And it's where you're more generous with your customers, your suppliers, and your employees than anyone else in the industry. And essentially the idea is if everybody would rather do business with a generous company rather than a greedy one, which I haven't heard of someone who would rather do business with a greedy company than a generous one. Maybe that person exists out there, but I haven't met them yet. And so if everyone would rather do business with generous companies, as long as we have a generous company in each category, those generous companies, we will outpace the greedy companies, and eventually the greedy companies will go away, and we'll only have businesses that actually help customers, suppliers, employees, and society in general. And so really the natural state of capitalism, Marx was wrong, is it's not moving to communism. It's about moving to generous capitalism rather than what I call today's stage, which is greedy capitalism. So that said, I'm going to close out there with my plug for generous capitalism and thank everybody for coming, for your great comments and questions. A lot of really smart people here tonight. That's what we love. Smart people that are looking to be the best version of ourselves, seek truth, and be fair. Thank you all for coming. Hope you all have a great night. And I will hope to see you guys next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you again, Garrett.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.